The woman who owned the silence, a $4 billion power move. Security approached her without a single word being spoken. No advance notice, no reasoning provided. Simply two guards, called as reinforcement, marching directly toward an African-American woman queuing with her first-class ticket clutched in her palm. The gate representative never examined her boarding pass. There was no necessity. "Ma'am, please step to the side." Those were the only words. 4 simple terms, delivered with the type of certainty typically reserved for intruders, not paying customers. As she was silently removed from the boarding line, observers watched. Yet not in objection, simply in validation. To their perception, she appeared out of place in seat 1A, not with her complexion, not with her quietness, not with her composure. However, here's what remained unknown. Not to the flight crew. Not to the manager smirking confidently near the desk. And definitely not to the gentleman who proceeded past her without even a glance at his identification. The woman they attempted to exclude hadn't purchased the first-class ticket. She had acquired something different, something more significant. And once you discover what that was, you'll comprehend why nobody on that aircraft ever traveled identically again. This isn't a narrative about ethnicity. This is a narrative about influence. The type you never anticipate coming. The type they failed to recognize standing directly before them. So consider this question. What occurs when the individual you attempt to silence happens to control the silence itself? Who was she? Why didn't she resist? And what had she arrived to accomplish? Share your thoughts in the comments. Inform us of your viewing location. And if you believe justice doesn't always arrive through raised voices, hit that subscribe button. You'll want to be present when the revelation unfolds. The sun hadn't completely emerged above the metropolitan horizon when Autumn Riley reached the airport terminal. The time was 5:43 a.m., early even by aviation standards. However, the priority boarding queue was already developing. Autumn positioned herself somewhat separated from the line, not because she didn't qualify, but because she had discovered long previously that closeness frequently attracted examination. She donned a navy blue sweatshirt, basic denim, and athletic shoes that had experienced better times. Her locks were secured in a simple ponytail, and she carried only a cloth bag draped across her shoulder. No wheeled luggage, no luxury baggage. Simply herself and the quiet determination of someone who had journeyed alone numerous times for purposes far more significant than leisure. As she approached the priority boarding area, a thin, professionally dressed employee at the front of the queue observed her with a moment of uncertainty. His identification badge displayed Kyle, and although he maintained the rehearsed expression of customer assistance, his eyebrows contracted the instant Autumn moved forward. "Greetings," he stated, angling his head slightly. "This section is designated for executive and first-class passengers." His manner was courteous, yet there existed an undertone beneath it, one of presumption. Autumn remained composed. She simply displayed her electronic boarding pass. "I'm aware," she responded, her voice steady. Kyle's expression wavered briefly, but he recovered swiftly and processed the code on her device. Behind Autumn, a middle-aged gentleman in a jacket and wireless earpiece expressed impatience audibly. Kyle glanced past her toward the man, then returned to Autumn, suddenly sensing pressure to expedite the process. He pressed several buttons on his monitor, then offered her a smile that barely touched his eyes. "Correct. You're cleared. Proceed, ma'am." However, as she continued forward, Kyle leaned toward his colleague nearby and whispered just audibly enough for her to overhear. "Assumed she was confused." The other staff member responded with a brief, entertained chuckle. Autumn continued walking. At the security checkpoint, conditions didn't improve. Although her boarding pass clearly indicated TSA pre-check authorization, she was directed aside. "Random inspection," the officer muttered, gesturing her toward a separate station. Her bag was opened, contents examined: travel-sized toiletries, a book, a sealed envelope, and a single folder secured with a red string. The agent hesitated at the envelope. "What's this?" "Legal documentation," Autumn stated calmly. "Confidential." "Are you an attorney or something?" he inquired, turning it over. "Not precisely," she answered. After a pause, the agent shrugged and permitted her to proceed. In the background, the line progressed smoothly for others: gentlemen in business attire, couples with designer luggage, an elderly woman wearing a diamond necklace that reflected the overhead illumination. Autumn observed the pattern but didn't respond. She had grown accustomed to it, the manner in which systems scrutinized more intensely when you didn't appear to fit the role. The way assumptions followed you like shadows under fluorescent lighting. She arrived at the gate with sufficient time remaining. Gate C9, according to the display, and settled in a corner seat of the waiting area. She didn't check her mobile device, didn't browse or communicate. Instead, she positioned the bag beside her, retrieved the sealed envelope, and placed it on her lap. It carried weight, figuratively speaking. Within it lay details of a financial transaction that possessed the potential to modify the future of one of the largest airline consolidations in North America. She didn't appear the part, but she held the decisive vote. A child in a nearby stroller gazed at her. Autumn offered a gentle smile. The child's mother looked up, met her gaze, and quickly redirected the stroller away. Autumn exhaled slowly and reclined in the chair. The speaker overhead crackled. "Final boarding for Flight 237 to Boston. All remaining passengers, please proceed to Gate C12. She observed the gate agent managing that flight, the way she smiled easily at the gentleman with the briefcase, the way she waved through the woman carrying a golden retriever in a travel bag. Courtesy arrived in tiers here, similar to the seating arrangements. She understood her position at the bottom of the invisible hierarchy, but that didn't trouble her. She wasn't present to be comfortable. She was there to observe, to evaluate, to confirm a suspicion. 3 years had passed since she received the letter. A trust fund with a condition. Her authorization was necessary before the subsequent phase of investment in a major transportation corporation could be completed. However, the law firm supervising the process had made an unusual request. They wanted her to experience one of the routes personally, anonymously. "Observe how they treat you," the managing partner had stated. "See what they're like when they believe you're nobody." And so, there she was. A boarding announcement interrupted her thoughts. "Now, boarding Group 1 for Flight 1187 to Denver. First Class and Executive Platinum. Please approach the gate." Autumn rose and walked calmly toward the queue. A gentleman 2 positions ahead glanced at her, then back at the gate agent, as if seeking confirmation that she belonged there. When her turn arrived, the agent barely acknowledged her. "Ma'am, boarding is restricted to First and Executive Platinum only." Autumn displayed her pass again. "C2A," she stated quietly. The agent blinked, scanned it, and forced a smile. "Proceed." As she stepped onto the jet bridge, she felt the intensity of multiple gazes on her back. She didn't appear like first class. She didn't behave as if she required it. And that was intentional. She reached her seat and settled slowly, placing the envelope carefully in the seat pocket before her. The gentleman in 2B offered a courteous nod, then returned to his email. The overhead compartments closed with finality. The engine sound began, and Autumn, for the first time that morning, permitted herself a small moment of control. Let them continue observing. They had no understanding of what this flight truly represented. The aircraft's hum intensified as the boarding door sealed with a dull finality, enclosing the hierarchy that had been carefully established in the space between seat assignments. Autumn sat in 2A beside the window, her bag positioned carefully beneath the seat ahead of her, and the sealed envelope resting flat across her lap like a stabilizer. The gentleman next to her, dressed in a heather-gray blazer and designer eyewear, offered a subtle smile without conversation, then resumed working on his tablet, clearly occupied. The cabin lighting dimmed slightly as the flight attendants moved efficiently through the aisle, securing bins and accounting for passengers, their attention gliding over Autumn as if she were an unverified product code among premium purchases. One of them, a woman with an elegant updo and a name tag reading Sloane, stopped briefly upon reaching row 2, scanning both seats. Her expression remained neutral but not welcoming, her smile rehearsed but not freely given. "Good morning," she said, with a tone that didn't elevate. Autumn responded with a polite acknowledgement, receiving none in return. Minutes later, the cabin supervisor moved through the aisle with a clipboard, pausing momentarily beside their row to whisper something to Sloane. Both glanced at Autumn before continuing toward the cockpit. As the aircraft began taxiing, Autumn sensed the subtle change in treatment. Not obvious, not theatrical, but unmistakably deliberate. Water bottles were distributed to passengers in row 1, then row 3. Row 2 was bypassed. Sloane passed her twice, each time offering items to other passengers, but never making direct eye contact with her. Autumn maintained her focus on the window, her fingers gently touching the envelope's edge, but she registered every action. In a world constructed on control, power often resided in the smallest choices, and presently, someone had decided to render her invisible. When the beverage service rolled down the aisle after takeoff, Sloane stood rigidly as the junior attendant asked Autumn for her drink preference. "Just water," Autumn replied. The attendant appeared hesitant, then leaned toward Sloane and whispered something. Sloane whispered back, then turned to Autumn with a thin smile. "Unfortunately, ma'am, complimentary beverage service isn't available for your ticket class," she said. Autumn raised an eyebrow but didn't argue. "Even for first class?" she asked calmly. Sloane blinked, consulted her manifest, then hesitated. "I'll verify with the cabin manager," she said briefly, and continued without another word. The gentleman in 2B gave her a puzzled expression. "I thought beverages were included in first," he asked no one specifically. Autumn didn't respond. Several rows ahead, an infant began crying. The sound started softly, but quickly escalated to a full wail. The flight attendant offered the mother a warm smile, provided a blanket, then offered assistance. The contrast was painful, not because Autumn expected to be pampered, but because the hospitality script was being modified in real time to exclude her. Moments later, another flight attendant returned with a warm cloth and offered it to her seatmate, asking if he needed anything else. He declined. Autumn was not acknowledged. She remained still, fingers resting on the envelope, its weight now heavier. She didn't know all the participants behind this flight, only the structures, but already she recognized the pattern. Power-tested individuals not when they were vocal, but when they were silent, and currently she was failing to create disturbance. Or so they believed. Approximately halfway through the flight, the lead cabin manager, a tall man named Bryce, stopped at her row, knelt slightly, and requested her boarding pass. "We've had a seating issue reported from ground crew," he said without introduction. "Would you mind if I rescanned your credentials?" Autumn held up her phone, unlocking it with a touch, and displaying the boarding pass once more. Bryce stared at it for several seconds longer than necessary. Then, with a strange expression, he said, "Strange. It must have been a synchronization error. I'll make a notation. No apology, no clarification, just a vague suggestion of some invisible malfunction that somehow justified singling her out." When he stood and departed, Sloane returned seconds later, kneeling with an overly bright smile. "We've updated your record, ma'am," she said, as if the record had ever been the issue. Then she added in a quieter tone, "Please, let us know if you need anything." But Autumn didn't respond. She glanced out the window instead, watching the clouds separate and reconnect like cells under a microscope. She had flown this route before, years ago, back when she was still a teenager, traveling for the first time to attend a funeral across the country. That trip had transformed her life. It was the moment she learned the world didn't grant you respect. It waited to see how much you'd endure before it considered you worthy. And sometimes, even then, it decided against you. The memory lingered now like vapor. Just as the seatbelt light illuminated again, Sloane returned to Autumn's row and crouched slightly beside her. "Apologies," she said in a rehearsed tone. "It seems your seat assignment may have been modified during boarding. Would you mind moving to 17D? We've had a request to rearrange for weight distribution." Autumn turned toward her with a measured look. "Weight distribution," she repeated. "That's the explanation." Sloane nodded, her smile tightening. "Yes, ma'am. Just protocol." Autumn looked at her calmly, said nothing, then leaned back in her seat. "I'll remain where I am." The smile froze on Sloane's lips. She opened her mouth to respond, but before she could speak, the intercom crackled again. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're anticipating mild turbulence. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened." Autumn exhaled slowly. No further attempt to relocate her was made. The turbulence never materialized. Time extended. People dozed, typed, whispered. Autumn stayed silent, motionless, the envelope untouched. The real turbulence, she knew, was only beginning. And when it arrived, it wouldn't come from the sky. It would come from the ground they thought they controlled. The cabin's hum settled into a mechanical rhythm, the type of background sound most passengers ignored as they slipped into sleep, quiet films, or overpriced audiobooks. But Autumn Riley wasn't tuning out. She was documenting. Every word, every glance, every selectively bypassed service offer was quietly accumulated into a mental repository that she'd learned to construct ever since she was old enough to notice the difference between being observed and being served. The silence was never vacant. It was filled with decisions, and the ones occurring around her weren't coincidental. They were rehearsed, calculated, and worse, they were comfortable for the people executing them. Sloane returned again, this time with warm towels on a silver tray, offering them with a pleasant, "Here you go," to rows 1, 3, and even 4 behind her. Autumn's row? Skipped. No explanation, no acknowledgement, not even eye contact. The gentleman beside her had long since immersed himself in his work, perhaps too uncomfortable to notice, or too accustomed to the fact that comfort like this often came at someone else's expense. Autumn didn't request the towel. She never did. She just sat quietly, staring at the tray as it passed her again like a spirit, ignoring the living. 20 minutes later, the aroma of warming bread filled the cabin. First-class meal service had commenced. Metal carts clicked and slid between rows, covered in cloths to make them appear elegant. Although Autumn knew it remained the same process behind the scenes. Heat, plate, serve, remove. Sloane reappeared, now with a menu and a forced smile. She stopped at 2B, presented the options with flourish, and wrote something neatly on her pad. Then she stepped past Autumn, as if she were a spare jacket hanging on the armrest. The cart rolled forward. No menu, no inquiry. Autumn waited, counted 3 rows served before she cleared her throat gently. Sloane turned her head, but didn't approach. "Was I skipped for meal service?" Autumn asked, her voice low and steady. Sloane walked back with mechanical patience. "Oh, I wasn't certain you were eligible," she said with a slight laugh, the kind that carried condescension disguised as fake charm. "Sometimes these assignments get complicated." Autumn tilted her head. "I'm eligible." Her tone didn't rise, but her eyes were sharp. "There's nothing complicated about that." Sloane hesitated, then checked the manifest again, this time more visibly, like she needed to perform the act of verification for her own confidence. "Right," she said, nodding quickly. "Would you like the herb-crusted chicken or the miso-glazed salmon?" Autumn chose the salmon without looking at her. "Coming right up," Sloane said with brittle cheerfulness, and disappeared again. When the tray arrived 15 minutes later, it came cold. The fish barely heated through, the vegetables wilted, the rice sticky in a way that wasn't intentional. Autumn didn't touch it. She placed the cover back over the plate, pushed the tray forward an inch, and returned to her envelope, still untouched, but somehow heavier with every passing hour. Across the aisle, another passenger requested a refill. A steward appeared immediately. Autumn watched the interaction develop, a perfect example of attention and service. She didn't envy it. She measured it. That was the distinction. At 33, she had long since ceased wanting to be accepted. What she wanted now was to test what people did when they thought they didn't have to pretend. Then came the moment that established the cabin's tone. A man, perhaps late 50s, khaki trousers and expensive headphones, walked down from row 5 and leaned on Autumn's seat as if it were public property. "Hey!" he said to Sloane, loud enough for others to hear. "She's in first." He didn't even look at Autumn as he said it. She didn't turn. She didn't need to. The question wasn't intended for her. It was meant to be a statement in the form of a question. Sloane laughed quietly, but not quietly enough. "She's on the list," she replied, brushing past the man. "Must be a points redemption or something." The man chuckled, patted the seat twice, and returned to his row. Autumn didn't move. Her heart didn't race, but her fingers curled slightly tighter around the corner of the envelope. If she had spoken right then, she wasn't sure it would have come out calm, and she needed calm for what came next. Later, during cabin cleanup, a different attendant came by. A younger man, clearly newer, less polished. He reached for Autumn's tray and paused. "Didn't like the salmon?" he asked, almost apologetic. Autumn gave him a polite but unreadable look. It was cold. He nodded, muttered something that sounded like sorry, and rolled the cart away. A few seconds later, she saw him whisper something to Sloane, who immediately shot a glance back toward row 2 with a look that wasn't guilt, but irritation. Autumn caught it. Sloane didn't smile again for the rest of the flight. The captain's voice eventually came over the speaker, announcing descent. Most passengers were half asleep or tucked into their headphones, but Autumn remained alert. She didn't trust ease, especially not here. Sloane passed by one last time, checking seat belts, and when she stopped at row 2, she glanced at Autumn's tote on the floor. Just a reminder, she said flatly. All personal items should be stored overhead during landing. Autumn looked at her evenly. I've flown before. Sloane didn't respond. She moved on. As the wheels touched down and the cabin jolted softly, Autumn's hand moved to the envelope again. The moment was approaching. She hadn't said much. She hadn't needed to. But everything they'd done, every skipped towel, every passive-aggressive rule interpretation, every glance and whisper had already spoken loudly enough for her. And as the plane taxied toward Gate 32, she felt it again. Not anger, not fear, just the cold, deliberate click of confirmation. She waited for the fastened seatbelt light to turn off before reaching into her tote and pulling out not just the envelope. But Autumn didn't rush. As passengers began gathering their belongings and shuffling into the aisle, bumping one another with laptop bags and duty-free shopping bags, she remained seated. She slid the envelope into her lap, with the same care one might handle a fragile antique. The seal was still unbroken, the red wax emblem gleaming faintly under the dim cabin light. A small movement caught her attention. Sloane, standing near the front of the cabin, watching her without pretending otherwise. There was no more facade of customer service now. The flight was over, the performance ended, and all that remained was the lingering tension of a power dynamic that had yet to fully reveal itself. Autumn waited until the aisle cleared slightly before she stood, her canvas tote over one shoulder, the envelope in hand. She walked slowly, intentionally. At the threshold of the aircraft, the captain had stepped out, standard protocol for first-class deplaning. He was smiling at the other passengers, thanking them, nodding politely. When Autumn reached the doorway, his smile faded slightly. "Safe travels," he said with a pause. Autumn nodded, but didn't return the pleasantry. She stepped into the jet bridge, the cool air greeting her like a transition. Halfway down the corridor, a uniformed airport agent stepped into her path. "Miss Riley?" he asked, clipboard in hand, earpiece snug. Autumn didn't blink. "Yes." The man gave a polite nod. "We've had a request to verify your final destination before releasing your luggage. Just a routine update." Autumn's lips twitched, approaching a smile, but something resembling disbelief. "You need to verify where I'm going," she repeated. The agent glanced down at his clipboard. "Yes, ma'am. It seems there was a reclassification in your reservation. You were listed under a flag status, code 19B. Internal override required." Autumn took a small step forward. "Who filed that code?" she asked, voice sharp now, each syllable landing with clarity. The agent hesitated. "It doesn't say. Might have been auto-generated." "It wasn't," she said flatly. "Take me to whoever's handling this." The agent shifted uncomfortably, then motioned toward a side hallway off the main concourse. "This way, ma'am." She followed him down a narrow corridor, lined with storage doors and industrial carpeting. The sterile smell of overused disinfectant filled the air. At the end, a small room marked Operations Holding 3B stood open. Inside, a desk with 2 screens, a printer, and a woman in a black blazer greeted her without standing. Her name tag read, "Turner, Ground Liaison Supervisor." She didn't smile. "Ms. Riley," she said crisply, "we've encountered an anomaly with your record. It appears your seat was reassigned mid-flight due to an internal review. The system flagged your reservation as irregular, possibly an accidental upgrade." Autumn placed the envelope down on the desk gently, not opening it yet. "Irregular how?" she asked. Turner tapped on her keyboard. "It says the ticket originated from a legacy voucher source, tied to a retired loyalty program no longer recognized by our current system." Autumn raised an eyebrow. So your system no longer recognizes its own assets? Turner paused. Legacy programs can sometimes be manipulated. Fraudulent resellers have been an issue. Autumn remained still, absorbing the weight of the accusation wrapped in professional phrasing. You're implying that I fraudulently boarded a seat I paid for? Turner straightened her back slightly. We're not accusing you of anything, ma'am. We're simply protecting our operational integrity. Autumn stared at her for a long moment, then reached into her tote bag and pulled out a black leather wallet. She slid out a slim card and placed it next to the envelope. It was platinum, embossed, and bore a serial number, not for banking, but identification. Turner stared at it, blinked, then looked up. I'm sorry. What exactly is this? It's access authorization, Autumn replied. Level 4 clearance under Easton Financial Holdings. The agent beside her stiffened. Turner frowned. That's an equity firm. No, Autumn said, calmly opening the envelope and pulling out a single-page document with letterhead so finely printed it shimmered. It's the parent institution that owns 41% of your airline's pending merger shares. She held the document up, letting Turner see the seal, the signatures, the dates. This is a binding disclosure agreement. I'm the listed witness and final signature before compliance release. The room shifted, not physically, but energetically. The way tension does when someone realizes the person they were trying to dismiss is the one holding the gate key. Turner's mouth opened slightly. I was informed. Of course not, Autumn cut in, because this flight was never about public disclosure. It was a real-world test, anonymous engagement from the only person authorized to validate the trust release clause. I'm here as a verifier, not a VIP. Silence stretched. The operations agent shifted his weight, clearly re-evaluating everything that had just occurred over the last 6 hours. Turner straightened her back again, this time out of formality, not power. Ms. Riley, we'd like to offer. No, Autumn interrupted. You'll not offer anything. You'll report everything. She turned toward the agent. Where's my bag? He stammered. In holding Bay D2, ma'am. I can escort you. Autumn nodded, picked up the envelope and card, and exited the room without another word. The hallway felt colder now, the sterile air more noticeable against her skin. The agent trailed behind her, radioing quietly as they made their way to the baggage level. When they arrived, the carousel was empty. In the corner, her canvas tote had been placed next to a steel bin with a yellow tag attached. Unverified item. Limited access. She picked it up wordlessly. A zipper had been pulled halfway open. She checked the folder inside. Pages slightly bent, not missing, but handled. She looked at the agent. Was this opened? I don't know, ma'am. It shouldn't have been. She zipped the tote and slung it over her shoulder. Get your supervisor, she said. Now? He nodded and stepped away. Autumn turned to face the far wall, where a thin window showed the edge of the runway. Planes took off every 3 minutes. Everything outside looked orderly, but the real turbulence had already started, beneath the surface. Between the lines, behind the smiling service scripts and ma'ams that hid the truth of what people thought they were allowed to control. She knew she couldn't fix the system in one flight, but she also knew. The hallway outside the baggage area was lined with industrial gray walls, fluorescent lighting that flickered ever so slightly, and the faint scent of cleaning chemicals that clung to the air like residue from too many apologies. Autumn stood alone with her tote over her shoulder, her fingers gripping the strap tighter than she realized. Her breath was even, but her mind was no longer calm. It was focused. She heard footsteps before she saw the man. He turned the corner briskly, wearing a tailored navy suit and a silver name badge that read, Eric Dempsey, Station Manager. He extended a hand, but Autumn didn't take it. She simply gave him a look, not hostile, but uninviting, and said, You opened my bag. Eric's smile faltered, then returned with a professional gloss. We had to ensure the item inside wasn't a safety concern. A sealed envelope marked with a legal insignia, she replied. That was your safety risk. Eric gestured toward a nearby private room. Would you mind stepping in so we can clarify a few matters? Autumn didn't move. You mean so you can control the conversation in private? He blinked, then cleared his throat. Our system flagged you as a behavioral concern. Because I refused to change seats? Autumn asked, her voice low, steady, and sharp. Eric hesitated. We received a report that your demeanor toward cabin crew was measured. Non-compliant. Potentially confrontational, he finished. Protocol requires we note such cases for future travel records. Autumn stepped closer, her eyes locked onto his. You're trying to rewrite the facts, she said. Not because I was aggressive, but because I didn't yield. Subscribe to the channel to continue receiving more powerful stories like this one. Don't miss out on narratives that reveal the truth behind closed doors and the courage it takes to stand against injustice. Hit that subscribe button and join our community of truth seekers.